Our guest is Casey Alexander, Managing Director. He's an equity analyst at Compass Point Research and Trading. He has almost 30 years of experience as an equity analyst. He's the longest tenured golf analyst, in fact, on Wall Street. Obviously, it makes him an expert in the industry, and he's also a very highly competitive amateur golfer as well of renown. So, Casey, first of all, welcome to the program. My question where I'd love to start today is, the deal between the PGA Tour and the Strategic Sports Group, how would you explain it? How would you describe what it is, and what does it mean?
Well, I think it shows you how the nature of compensation for golfers, which are almost inarguably global sports superstars, is changing. You think about the nature of compensation in other sports: football, baseball, basketball, soccer. 90% of that compensation is contractual compensation, and only 10% of that compensation is performance-based compensation. A lot of it is based upon performance that has already taken place, but it's contractual compensation at its heart. And golf has traditionally been almost 100% performance-based compensation, outside of perhaps club endorsement contracts. And when you think about it, that's not the way that global sports superstars are paid, and not in this day and age. And so the idea that a global sports superstar can come to your event, provide his name, image, and likeness, participate in your pro-am, spend 2 days promoting your event, have a bad Friday afternoon, and walk away with zero compensation, that's not the way that a Rory McIlroy or a Jon Rahm is going to be compensated in a day and age where they are global sports superstars. So the deal with SSG is designed to provide an element of contractual compensation to PGA Tour players and to global superstars, because that's what LIV and the PIF have done with LIV. Is they've provided a higher element of contractual compensation while still maintaining an element of performance-based compensation at each tournament's event, at which the PGA Tour will do as well. But let's just not forget here that we are transitioning to a period where there will be more contractual compensation for golf global sports superstars, and frankly, that's the way global sports superstars are paid these days.
The fact that you've used the phrase global golf superstars multiple times, Casey, I'm curious if that's an indication of the fact of whether we in the golf industry are not fully realizing just how global these players are, how big they are in terms of superstars on a global basis. I know, for example, the last research study I saw was that I believe golf was eighth largest sport globally, which put it in front of, just as an example, the NFL.
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement, Matt. I would bet you donuts to dollars that if you went to Korea, Rory McIlroy and Jon Rahm are better known than Tom Brady and Peyton Manning in Korea. Wow. Frankly, this is a global game, even more so, played in over 100 countries around the world. And the other thing is that this game feeds to a demographic that is highly attractive for advertisers and sponsors, and that's why it may seem like it's an outsized level of compensation relative to the number of eyeballs that it draws. But the fact of the matter is the demographics of the eyeballs that it draws are highly attractive to advertisers and sponsors that want to head towards upper income demographics.
All right, so let me ask you a question from a little bit of a different perspective then. You've explained to us how and why this is likely going to evolve in some way, shape, or form to the benefit of players from a compensation level or otherwise. But from the position of those with the Strategic Sports Group, they are investing potentially billions of dollars. What do they hope to get from that? What is the ROI?
Well, That's a great question. Normally, and I've heard this characterized as a private equity investment, I think that only has to do with structure in this particular instance. All right. The folks that are behind SSG, I mean, come on, we're talking about owner of the Mets, owner of the Red Sox, owner of major sports teams. The typical private equity time horizon is 3 to 5, maybe 7 years looking for a payback on your investment. Not these folks. These are not the typical private equity investors. These are folks that intend to hold on to this for a long time and hopefully create generational wealth out of this investment in the PGA Tour. That is similar to the point of view of PIF. I have found it interesting that it's been characterized several times that PIF is spending money with no intent for any economic return. That's just a misunderstanding of time horizons here, okay? The PIF invests in terms of decades and generations, not a 3 to 5 year time horizon similar to private equity. And investments for decades and generations can take a very long view. And in this case, a fund of this size can burn $1 billion or $2 billion here, looking towards a return where 10 years, 15 years, 25 years from now, it's generating 1 to 2 to 3 billion per year in additional income for them as a part of their potential investment in the game. And I would also point out that it's extremely likely that there's still going to be an investment from the PIF fund because the level of compensation is still not even between the two parties involved here. And until PIF is involved in the PGA Tour, which would provide them the motivation to level out these avenues of income that have been created, that's when you're going to eventually be able to create a fully integrated global golf tour. And the great thing about it is it'll have black hats, it'll have white hats, it'll have Hatfields and McCoys. And what golf has always asked for year in and year out is great rivalries. And the way that this is working out, it is likely to create really interesting rivalries. And television and the media will eventually grasp onto that because that's what television and the media does. It writes great stories and it knows how to do that.
All right, so let's talk about, if you will, at least the television half of television and media and this idea of time horizons. In whatever time frame you please, Casey, I'm curious where this massive return is going to come from that's going to give back the profit to the people that have made this investment. And again, in whatever time frame that takes, is it anticipated in actually the global growth of the game? So is it television revenue? Is it because the game, when it gets bigger and unified, it's going to attract more corporate investment? Where are the dollars coming in from?
Well, where are they coming in from today, Matt? We're seeing the NFL move to streaming platforms such as Thursday Night Prime. We saw a playoff game that earned incredible rights fees just by going to Peacock, okay? How long is it going to be before you're going to watch the British Open on Peacock, okay? That sort of ability to push to every platform available is raising the revenue streams for virtually every sport globally. The idea that golf isn't eventually going to evolve in that direction and participate from it, and those additional streams of income are going to draw more sponsors. I think we could bet that at some point in time we're going to see Wells Fargo back in the fold of the global golf scene because it's a global financial institution.
So, Casey, when you see a consortium like the Strategic Sports Group come together as investors, but in essence now as owners of a major sports league, what does that tell you about sport at large? Is this something that you expect to see in, just name some of the sports that these same entities are owners of? The NBA, the NHL, the NFL, Major League Baseball, English Premier League, maybe Formula One, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think to a certain extent, in many of these other sports, we're already there. The NFL is trying to push more globally. Arthur Blank is a part of the sports strategic group. Baseball is starting to really become more of a global game. We've seen the incredible signing of Shohei Ohtani, and the other thing is that these are folks who already work in their own businesses on a global scale, and in many cases have worked many times with sovereign wealth funds. And so I think they're going to find a path to work with PIF perhaps easier than the PGA Tour without their involvement would have been able to. And I think you've seen that from statements from Rory that there's a way that this goes forward, and where does it eventually end up is where it should have ended up in the first place, which is a fully integrated global golf tour that intermixes all of these global sports superstars, which I know no other way to describe them because they are known virtually globally.
Casey, I know it's somewhat a sign of the times, kind of the red state, blue state society that we live in, but there are parties that are trying to define what's going on right now to say somehow the investment from the strategic sports group is wall building or fence building, if you please, in between the PGA Tour and the Public Investment Fund. What is it in reality? Does this investment by the Strategic Sports Group help further the negotiations with PIF? Where do we stand?
Oh, I think very much so. I think it does help it in the long term, simply because these are folks, again, that in their own businesses in many ways have dealt with sovereign wealth funds. And they all do have some experience with private equity in their backgrounds, and every one of them, has learned that other people's money is another way to make money. Also, as I mentioned before, having the PIF fund involved in the PGA Tour structure gives the PIF fund motivation to level out the compensation levels of Live versus the PGA Tour, which will then allow for cross currents. The way that it sits right now, if you think about it, Matt, just think about the fact that there's a higher level of compensation available on the Live Tour. What does that do? That encourages guys who have just won a major to then take a higher level of contractual compensation on the Live Tour, knowing that they're grandfathered into the majors for the next 5 years, and be able to generate lifetime wealth in a 5-year period of time through membership of the Live Tour until you even out the levels of compensation between the two tours and start to allow some crossover. There's always going to be some motivation for, unfortunately, the best players to step across to a tour that gives them a higher level of contractual compensation as opposed to performance-based compensation.
Fascinating stuff. Now, Casey, you've basically answered this in way, shape, or form already today, but I want to ask you straight up. Your job is to analyze businesses. Your job is to analyze industries. If you were looking at golf at its top tier of competition, which is inclusive of Live, it's inclusive of the PGA Tour, it's inclusive of the DP World Tour, how would you grade that industry right now?
Oh, look, I think it's gone through a period somewhat of upheaval. I think if you're a player, no matter which tour you're on, you have to thank the involvement of the PIF Tour because it certainly raised your standard of compensation. I understand why fans right now are saying, I kind of have lost interest in watching PGA Tour events. I'm not super interested in watching Live Tour events. But I think we're going through this period of transition that will end up in a fully integrated global golf tour. And when it does, like I said, you're going to have great storylines driven around the Hatfields and the McCoys the spectating golf public has been dying for rivalries for years, and you've just built in a full generation of rivalries for spectators that can make for some of the most compelling TV ever. And that will drive revenues through broadcast, streaming, alternative channels of distribution that will make both tours and all tours more popular in the end.
All right, so Casey, I would like you to hear the following comments from Patrick Cantlay, who is a member of the board, and these were made immediately after the announcement was made, so I can get your reaction. Here's Patrick Cantlay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think hopefully this strengthens up the PGA Tour. That's the idea, and I think it will. The investors that we have coming alongside are very experienced and very sophisticated, and hopefully it's a real positive step in the right direction. I think it will be. Yeah, I think anytime someone makes a sizable investment like that, they're going to be watching over the investment. And I think because of their sports experience, we'll really lean on their expertise to try to grow the sport and make it as good as it possibly can be. Well, I think you've already seen some changes by the tour over the last couple of years, sizable changes. And so getting the top guys together more often, which I think is good. This event, you see, has the strongest field that it's had in a number of years. And I think that's fantastic. I think that's what the fans want to see. And so I really hope that, this deal brings about change that really makes it better for the fans, because I think they've suffered a lot over the last couple of years, and I hope that the product will be better for them going forward. Everyone's divided. Like I've said, over the last couple of years, I've been pretty the same. I mean, people are welcome to make the choice that they'd like to make. It's a personal choice. It has been. And, as far as coming back, we'll see. It's up to a group of us. I know players feel all over the board on that issue. And so my job as a player director is to represent the entire membership. And so if something like that were to come down the road, I'm sure we would have to have a robust conversation around that topic. I think the PGA Tour is definitely stronger after having this deal go through. As far as PIF, I haven't been having any, real conversations myself about that. So I think, that's a question for down the road for the board and for also the NUCO board to decide.
All right, so Casey, it sounds like Patrick Cantlay is echoing the same enthusiasm for the future that you are telling us that we can look forward to with his investment. Is there anything else in what he said that struck you?
Well, I didn't hear anything that he said that was in conflict with anything that I've laid out today. Other than, the road back to getting the two parties to the point where they can play together on a fully integrated global golf tour, because he's right. The PGA Tour is trying to create a format with their elevated events where the best players can be together to play against each other. But let's not kid ourselves. It's not all the best players. And certainly there's a group of players on the LIV Tour that clearly and adequately belong in that category, should be in that sentence. And eventually the needs of the media to create great golf stories will require them to be together more than just the four majors each year.
Do you think, Casey, that this is a situation where the tide is going to make all the ships rise? What about mid-tier golfers, regardless of the tour that they play on currently?
Yeah, I think that's tough. I do think that the structure of the PGA Tour with the elevated events is sort of bifurcating the tour a little bit. I also do have questions relative to how they're going to distribute ownership shares to PGA Tour members of this new entity. And one would assume that there's going to have to be some sort of vesting process, right? You wouldn't want an owner to be somebody who misses 17 cuts this year and is outside the top 125, and yet has a perpetual ownership stake in the tour. It's got to vest over some period of time relative to each individual's performance, and that's what those guys at SSG are likely going to be very good at figuring out the most equitable way to do that. But ultimately, I think that they're going to be welcoming to put both sides together to create something even better.
Fascinating stuff, Casey, and I appreciate your perspective that you have provided to us today, both in its breadth and width, and also with your candor of the same. As I was saying earlier in the program, I happen to completely agree with you. I think this investment from the Strategic Sports Group makes the game stronger, not just the PGA Tour. It makes the game stronger as they move forward with further discussions with PIF and what this means for the future of the game and where golf sits. I am interested in something else, though. So since I have you here, I want to tap into your expertise. I saw a recent report that you were one of, if not the primary author of, which was talking about the game of golf in 2024. Now, I'm talking about all of you at home and how the game of golf is going to impact you, rounds played, equipment purchases, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Could you talk to us about 2024 and how it looks for the game of golf?
Sure. It's my expectation that at least as the United States is concerned, that 2024 is likely to be a record year for golf club equipment sales. And and look, my job isn't to tell you what the future is. My job is to tell you what the odds are, okay? And we try to help investors stack the odds in their favor. But we've got a number of signposts that lead us to that. 2023 had a record number of rounds played, over 520 million rounds. It had a record number of participants, 26.6 million participants, which finally exceeded the previous record that I think goes back more than 10 years previously. And those surveyed, which were over 1,000 surveyed by Sports and Leisure Research Group, have a record intention to play more rounds in 2024 and have their highest expectation ever to spend the same or more for equipment in 2024. So you connect those dots, which is record rounds played by record participants who have a record intention to play as much or more and a record intention to spend as much or more. And that should lead you to the conclusion that 2024 will be a record year for equipment sales, because intention is way more important than what their actual ability to play is. Follow that track, and that should lead to record equipment sales in 2024, at least as the United States goes. And since that's 50% of the market for global golf equipment, sort of as the U.S. goes, so kind of goes the rest of the world, at least in the general sense.
That is fascinating, Casey, but I'm curious about one thing. From call it a romantic perspective with the game, if you will, we look at it and say, during COVID and post-COVID, people discovered the exercise virtues of the game, the fact that you can reconnect with other human beings through the games, obviously the fun and the challenging aspects of the game, etc. But from your perspective, from the perspective of cold numbers, why is the game of golf continuing to flourish?
Well, it's not cold numbers, Matt, okay? What happened here is prior to COVID, the statistics were that 2 out of every 3 people who joined the game quit inside of a year, okay? And for all the reasons that we know, it's a supremely difficult game to learn. It's very difficult to get over the hump of proficiency. It has a Byzantine set of rules, and in often cases, golf isn't particularly friendly to newcomers. It can be somewhat of a hostile environment, again, with something outside the rules called etiquette, which makes things complicated for new folks joining the game. But the fact of the matter is that COVID had a 2-year cycle of other forms of entertainment that was not available to those folks. And golf was outdoors, it was social, it was available, and it was a safe way for women, kids, etc., to socialize and have fun and get exercise without risking themselves in the COVID environment. What it did was 2 years forced many of those to get over the hump of proficiency and get to the point where they went from newbies to actual golfers. And once you become an actual golfer, the avidity of the game is compelling. And as you know, once you're over that hump of proficiency and consider yourself a golfer, not a startup golfer, then you're hooked. Then you're there.
In whatever form that you are hooked to, which we welcome all of those forms in the game of golf. Casey
100%.
Alexander is the managing director at equity analyst at Compass Point Research and Trading. CompassPointLLC.com is the website. Thank you for your time, my friend. Fascinating as always.
Matt, thanks so much for having me on, especially on one of your first shows, and congratulations on your show joining the Golf Channel.
I appreciate that, my friend. We'll be back with more of the Fairways of Life show right after this.